Chapter 1. There is a quiet question that lives within every human being, whether acknowledged or not. It does not always appear in words, and it rarely demands attention in obvious ways, yet it is always present beneath the surface of daily life. It emerges in moments of exhaustion, in the silence after achievement, in the unease that lingers even when everything seems to be going well. That question is simple, yet profoundly complex. Why, despite everything we pursue and obtain, does a sense of complete peace remain just out of reach? From a distance, life appears to be a sequence of goals and accomplishments. We are taught from an early age that happiness is something to be built through effort. Study hard, achieve success, earn stability, form relationships, gain recognition, and eventually, peace will follow. This belief becomes deeply embedded in the mind, shaping not only our decisions but also our identity. We begin to define ourselves by what we do, what we achieve, and how others perceive us. And yet, if you observe carefully, you will notice something unexpected. Even those who appear to have everything, status, wealth, influence, admiration, often carry a subtle restlessness within them. It may not always be visible, but it reveals itself in quiet ways. The constant need to stay occupied, the discomfort with stillness, the inability to feel fully satisfied for long. Achievements bring temporary fulfillment, but the mind quickly moves forward, searching for the next target, the next improvement, the next validation. This cycle is not accidental. It is the natural consequence of looking for inner peace in external conditions. The mind is conditioned to believe that peace is something to be acquired, something that exists outside of you and must be reached through effort. But this assumption contains a fundamental misunderstanding. If peace were dependent on external circumstances, it would always be unstable, always temporary, always vulnerable to change. And since change is an unavoidable part of life, peace would remain fragile and unpredictable. True inner peace does not function this way. It is not created by circumstances, nor is it destroyed by them. It exists independently, beneath the fluctuations of experience, beneath the constant movement of thought and emotion. The challenge is not to create peace, but to recognize and reconnect with it. This realization marks the beginning of a different kind of journey. Unlike the pursuits you may be familiar with, this journey does not move outward. It does not require you to accumulate more, achieve more, or become more in the conventional sense. Instead, it invites you to turn inward, not as an escape from the world, but as a way to understand it more deeply. At first, this inward movement may feel unfamiliar. The mind is accustomed to activity, to stimulation, to constant engagement. When external distractions are reduced, the internal noise becomes more noticeable. Thoughts arise rapidly, emotions surface unexpectedly, and there may be a sense of discomfort in simply being present without doing anything. This discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that you are beginning to see clearly. For most of your life, the mind has been occupied with external inputs, tasks, conversations, responsibilities, entertainment. These inputs create a continuous stream of engagement that keeps deeper layers of the mind hidden. When that stream slows down, what was previously unnoticed begins to emerge. You may notice how often your thoughts drift into the past or the future. You may become aware of recurring patterns, worries that repeat, judgments that arise automatically, expectations that shape your perception of events. You may begin to see how quickly the mind reacts, how it labels experiences as good or bad, desirable or undesirable, often without conscious intention. This observation is not meant to create self-criticism. It is meant to create awareness. Awareness is the foundation of inner peace. Without awareness, You are carried by your thoughts and reactions without realizing it. You become identified with them, believing that they define who you are. A stressful thought creates stress. An anxious thought creates anxiety. And these states seem inevitable because they are experienced as part of your identity. But when awareness is present, a subtle but powerful shift occurs. You begin to see that thoughts are not permanent. They arise, they exist for a moment, and then they pass. Emotions follow a similar pattern. Even intense feelings, when observed carefully, reveal themselves to be temporary. They may linger longer than thoughts, but they are not fixed. They change, evolve, and eventually dissolve. This realization creates space. In that space, you are no longer completely absorbed by what you experience. Instead of being lost in a thought, you can observe it. Instead of being overwhelmed by an emotion, you can feel it without being defined by it. This does not remove challenges from your life, but it changes your relationship with them. And that change is profound. Inner peace is not the absence of difficulty. It is the presence of stability within difficulty. To understand this more clearly, consider the nature of external events. Life is unpredictable. Situations change, plans fail, people behave in unexpected ways. No matter how carefully you try to control your environment, there will always be variables beyond your influence. If your sense of peace depends entirely on these variables, it will always be at risk. But if your peace is rooted within, it becomes resilient. This does not mean that you become indifferent or detached from life. On the contrary, it allows you to engage more fully. When you are not constantly reacting from a place of fear or frustration, your actions become more intentional. You respond rather than react. You make decisions based on clarity rather than impulse. This shift cannot be forced. It develops gradually, through practice and reflection. One of the simplest ways to begin is by learning to pause. A pause may seem insignificant, but it has transformative potential. In the space of a few seconds, you interrupt the automatic flow of thought and reaction. You create an opportunity to observe rather than immediately respond. For example, when something triggers irritation, the immediate impulse may be to react, perhaps through words, expressions, or internal criticism. But if you pause, even briefly, you create distance between the trigger and your response. In that distance, awareness has a chance to emerge. You may still feel the irritation, but it no longer controls you in the same way. You can choose how to respond, or whether to respond at all. This ability to pause is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength. It reflects a level of control that goes beyond external achievements. It demonstrates mastery over the most complex system you will ever encounter, your own mind. As you develop this practice, you will begin to notice subtle changes. Situations that once caused intense reactions may feel more manageable. Thoughts that once seemed overwhelming may appear less convincing. You may find moments of stillness that were previously unavailable to you. These moments are not accidental. They are glimpses of your natural state. Inner peace is not something you construct. It is something you uncover as layers of mental noise begin to settle. This process requires patience. The mind has been conditioned over many years, and it will not change instantly. There will be moments of clarity, followed by moments of distraction. There will be progress, followed by setbacks. This is not failure. It is part of the process. What matters is consistency. Each moment of awareness, no matter how brief, contributes to a larger shift. Each time you observe rather than react, you weaken old patterns and strengthen new ones. Over time, these small changes accumulate, leading to a significant transformation in how you experience life. It is important to approach this journey without harsh judgment. Self-criticism only adds another layer of mental noise. Instead, cultivate a sense of curiosity. Observe your thoughts and reactions as you would observe a natural phenomenon, with interest without immediate evaluation. This perspective creates a more supportive internal environment, one that encourages growth rather than resistance. As you continue, you may begin to notice something subtle but deeply reassuring. Even when the mind is active, even when thoughts are present, there is a background of stillness that remains unchanged. It is not affected by individual thoughts or emotions. It does not come and go. It simply exists. This stillness is not something you need to create. It is already there. The more you become aware of it, the more accessible it becomes. It begins to feel less like a rare experience and more like a constant presence, one that you can return to at any time. This is the essence of inner peace. It is not dependent on silence, though silence can help reveal it. It is not dependent on specific conditions, though certain conditions may make it easier to notice. It is a fundamental aspect of your being, one that remains available regardless of external circumstances. The journey toward inner peace is not about becoming someone else. It is about recognizing who you are beyond the constant activity of the mind. And as you begin to recognize this, even in small moments, you will notice a shift, not dramatic at first, but steady and undeniable. A sense of ease begins to replace tension. A sense of clarity begins to replace confusion. And a quiet confidence emerges, not based on external validation, but on an internal sense of stability. This is where the journey truly begins, not with a dramatic transformation, but with a simple realization that what you have been searching for has never been absent. Chapter 2. The mind is often described as a powerful tool, and, rightly so. It is capable of extraordinary reasoning, creativity, planning, and analysis. It allows human beings to build civilizations, solve complex problems, and imagine possibilities beyond immediate reality. Yet, for all its brilliance, the mind also carries a paradox. The very instrument that has the capacity to elevate life can also become the source of deep unrest when it operates without awareness. Most people assume that they are in control of their minds. But if you observe closely, you may begin to notice something different. Thoughts appear without invitation. They move rapidly from one subject to another. They replay past events, construct future scenarios, and generate endless commentary about everything that happens. This process continues throughout the day, often unnoticed, shaping emotions and behavior in subtle but powerful ways. To understand inner peace, it is essential to first understand this dynamic. Thoughts are not the problem. They are natural. They are part of the mind's function, just as the heart beats and the lungs breathe. The challenge arises not from thinking itself, but from identification with thinking. When you believe that every thought represents reality, when you treat every mental narrative as truth, you become entangled in a continuous cycle of reaction. Consider how often your mood is influenced by a single thought. A memory of a past mistake may trigger regret. A prediction about the future may create anxiety. A comparison with someone else may lead to dissatisfaction. In each case, the emotional response is not caused directly by the external world, but by the interpretation created within the mind. This distinction is critical. It reveals that much of what you experience is not determined by circumstances alone, but by how those circumstances are processed internally. Two people can face the same situation and respond in completely different ways, not because the situation is different, but because their relationship with their thoughts is different. This is where awareness becomes transformative. When you begin to observe your thoughts rather than automatically believe them, a subtle separation occurs. you start to recognize that thoughts are events in the mind, not absolute truths. They arise, they pass, and they do not have inherent authority unless you give it to them. Imagine sitting beside a flowing river. Leaves drift along the surface, carried by the current. Each leaf represents a thought. You have two choices. You can remain seated on the bank, watching the leaves pass, or you can jump into the river and be carried away by the flow. For most of life, people are in the river, moving from one thought to another without realizing that stepping back is even possible. The practice of inner peace begins with stepping back. This does not mean stopping thoughts entirely. That would be both unrealistic and unnecessary. Instead, it means changing your position in relation to them. Rather than being immersed in every thought, you learn to observe them with a degree of distance. At first, this may seem difficult. The mind has been conditioned to engage with every thought automatically. It may feel unnatural to simply watch without reacting. But like any skill, this ability develops with practice. One of the most effective ways to begin is through attention to the breath. The breath is constant. It does not require effort to exist, and it is always happening in the present moment. By directing your attention to the sensation of breathing, you anchor yourself in something stable. The mind will inevitably wander, but each time you notice this and gently return your focus to the breath, you strengthen your capacity for awareness. This process is simple, but its impact is profound. Over time, you begin to notice the space between thoughts. You become aware of the moment a thought arises, rather than only noticing it after it has already influenced your emotions. This awareness creates a choice. Instead of reacting automatically, you can pause. This pause is where inner peace begins to take form. In that brief moment, you are no longer completely controlled by the mind's patterns. You have the opportunity to decide whether a thought is useful, whether it deserves attention, or whether it can simply be allowed to pass. For example, imagine a situation where someone speaks to you in a way that feels disrespectful. The immediate thought might be, "They are wrong," or "I need to respond." This thought may quickly lead to emotion, anger, defensiveness, or frustration. But if awareness is present, you can notice the thought before acting on it. You may still feel the emotion, but you are not compelled to react impulsively. You can choose to respond calmly, or perhaps not respond at all. The external situation may not change, but your internal experience is entirely different. This is not suppression. It is clarity. Suppression involves pushing thoughts or emotions away, denying their presence. Awareness, on the other hand, involves acknowledging them without being controlled by them. It is a state of observation, not resistance. As this awareness deepens, you may begin to notice patterns in your thinking. Certain thoughts repeat frequently. Certain triggers consistently produce similar reactions. These patterns are not random. They are the result of conditioning built over time. From childhood onward, experiences shape the way the mind interprets reality. Beliefs are formed, often unconsciously. These beliefs influence perception, guiding attention towards certain aspects of experience while ignoring others. Over time, they become so familiar that they appear to be facts rather than interpretations. For instance, if you have developed a belief that you are not good enough, the mind may constantly search for evidence to support that belief. Small mistakes are magnified, while successes are minimized or dismissed. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle that maintains the belief. Breaking this cycle requires awareness. When you observe your thoughts consistently, you begin to see these patterns clearly. You recognize that they are not inherent truths, but learned responses. This recognition weakens their hold. It is important to approach this process with patience. the mind does not change instantly. Patterns that have developed over many years will take time to dissolve. There may be moments when you feel fully aware, followed by moments when you are completely absorbed in thought. This fluctuation is natural. What matters is not perfection, but persistence. Each time you return to awareness, you are reinforcing a new way of relating to the mind. Each moment of observation, no matter how brief, contributes to a gradual transformation. In addition to observing thoughts, it is equally important to become aware of the present moment. The present moment is often overlooked because the mind is frequently occupied with the past or the future. It replays memories, analyzes past events, anticipates future outcomes, and constructs scenarios that may never occur. While some level of planning and reflection is necessary, excessive mental activity in these directions creates tension. Inner peace is found in the present. This does not mean ignoring the past or neglecting the future. It means recognizing that life is always experienced now. The only moment in which you can act, feel, and be aware is the present moment. When attention is anchored here, the mind naturally becomes quieter. You can practice this by bringing awareness to ordinary activities. When you are walking, notice the sensation of your feet touching the ground. When you are eating, pay attention to the taste, texture, and movement. When you are listening to someone, focus fully on their words rather than preparing your response in advance. These practices may seem simple, but they are powerful. They train the mind to remain present, reducing the tendency to drift into unnecessary thinking. Over time, this creates a sense of stability. The mind becomes less reactive, less scattered, and more grounded. As this grounding develops, you may begin to experience moments of stillness that feel unfamiliar yet deeply comforting. These moments are not empty. They are full of clarity and calm. They do not require effort to maintain because they arise naturally when the mind is not constantly occupied. It is in these moments that you begin to understand inner peace, not as a concept, but as a direct experience. You realize that peace is not something distant or unattainable. It is not reserved for specific conditions or special circumstances. It is available whenever the mind is not creating unnecessary disturbance. This realization is both simple and profound. It shifts the focus from trying to control the external world to understanding the internal one. It reveals that while you may not always control what happens around you, you can influence how you relate to it. And in that influence lies freedom. Freedom from automatic reactions, from repetitive patterns, from the constant pull of unexamined thoughts. This freedom does not remove challenges from life, but it changes how those challenges are experienced. Instead of being overwhelmed, you remain steady. Instead of being consumed, you remain aware. Instead of being driven by the mind, you begin to guide it. This is the essence of mastering the mind, not through force, but through understanding. As you continue this journey, remember that the goal is not to eliminate thought, but to see it clearly. The mind will continue to function, to generate ideas, to solve problems, but it will no longer dominate your experience in the same way. You will still think, but you will also be aware. And in that awareness, a deeper dimension of experience begins to unfold, one that is not defined by constant activity, but by quiet presence. This presence is not something you need to create. It is what remains when the noise subsides. And as you become more familiar with it, you will begin to recognize it as something that has always been there, quietly supporting every moment of your life. This is the doorway to inner peace. And now that you have seen it, even briefly, the journey begins to deepen in ways that cannot be reversed. This force is attachment, not the kind of attachment that reflects care, connection, or love, but a more rigid form. The psychological dependence on outcomes, people, identities, and expectations to define your sense of stability and worth. Attachment operates quietly. It does not announce itself directly. Instead, it disguises itself as preference, as ambition, as necessity. It convinces you that certain things must happen in a particular way for you to feel complete, secure, or at peace. And once this belief takes hold, it begins to shape your internal world in powerful ways. To understand the role of attachment in the absence of inner peace, you must look closely at how it manifests in everyday life. Consider how often your emotional state is influenced by results. A plan unfolds exactly as expected, and you feel satisfied. Something deviates from that plan, and discomfort arises. A message is received, and you feel acknowledged. It is delayed or absent, and a sense of unease appears. These fluctuations may seem small, even insignificant, but over time they create a pattern, a continuous dependence on external conditions for internal stability. This dependence is the essence of attachment. At first glance, it may appear harmless. After all, it is natural to have preferences, to care about outcomes, to value relationships. The issue is not in having these elements in your life. The issue arises when your sense of well-being becomes tied to them in such a way that their change or absence disrupts your inner balance. Attachment creates a fragile form of peace. It is a peace that exists only when conditions align with expectations. The moment those conditions shift, and they inevitably will, the sense of peace is disturbed. This leads to a constant cycle of seeking, holding, and fearing loss. Even when things are going well, there is often an undercurrent of anxiety, a subtle concern that what is present now may not remain. This is why attachment is closely linked to fear. Where there is attachment, there is always the possibility of loss. And where there is the possibility of loss, the mind begins to anticipate it, consciously or unconsciously. This anticipation creates tension. It may not always be intense, but it is persistent, influencing thoughts, decisions, and reactions in ways that are often unnoticed. To move toward inner peace, it is necessary to understand this dynamic deeply, not just intellectually, but through direct observation. Start by noticing how attachment appears in your own experience. Pay attention to moments when you feel disturbed. Ask yourself, what am I expecting right now? Or what am I holding on to? Often, you will find that there is a specific outcome you want, a particular response you are hoping for, or a situation you believe should be different from what it is. This inquiry is not meant to create judgment. It is meant to create clarity. When you see attachment clearly, its influence begins to weaken. Not because you force it to disappear, but because awareness reveals its nature. You begin to recognize that much of your discomfort is not caused by reality itself, but by the resistance to reality not matching your expectations. This realization is both liberating and challenging. It is liberating because it shows you that your peace is not entirely dependent on external conditions. It is challenging because it asks you to release something that has long felt essential, the need to control outcomes. Letting go of attachment does not mean giving up on goals or losing interest in life. It does not mean becoming passive or indifferent. Instead, it means shifting your relationship with outcomes. You can still set goals, work toward them, and care deeply about what you do, but your inner state is no longer determined solely by whether those goals are achieved in a specific way or within a specific time frame. You engage fully, but you are not defined by the result. This distinction is subtle, yet transformative. Imagine working towards something important, a project, a career milestone, a personal aspiration. With attachment, your sense of worth becomes tied to the outcome. Success brings relief or validation, while failure brings disappointment or self-doubt. Your emotional state fluctuates based on results. Without attachment, you still work with dedication and focus. You still aim for excellence. But your sense of self is not at stake. You are able to learn from outcomes without being destabilized by them. Success is appreciated, and failure is understood as part of the process, not as a reflection of your value. This shift creates stability. It allows you to move through life with greater ease, not because challenges disappear, but because they no longer threaten your internal foundation. You become more adaptable, more resilient, and more open to change. Another important aspect of attachment is identity. Over time, you develop a sense of who you are based on experiences, roles, achievements, and beliefs. You may identify yourself through your profession, your relationships, your abilities, or your past. While these elements contribute to your life, they do not define your entire existence. Yet the mind often treats them as fixed identities. When identity becomes rigid, attachment strengthens. For example, if you strongly identify with a particular role, any threat to that role may feel like a threat to your sense of self. If circumstances change, if a position is lost, if a role shifts, if recognition decreases, the resulting discomfort can be significant, not because of the change itself, but because of the attachment to identity. To cultivate inner peace, it is important to see identity as fluid rather than fixed. You are not limited to a single definition. Roles change, circumstances evolve, and life unfolds in unpredictable ways. When you allow your identity to remain flexible, you reduce the pressure to maintain a specific image or status. This creates a sense of freedom. You can still engage in roles and responsibilities, but you are not confined by them. This flexibility extends to relationships as well. Attachment in relationships often appears as the need for others to behave in certain ways to maintain your sense of comfort. You may expect consistent responses, specific behaviors, or particular forms of validation. When these expectations are not met, disappointment arises. Healthy connection, however, does not require rigid expectations. It is based on understanding, respect, and presence rather than control. When attachment is reduced, relationships become more authentic. You allow others to be as they are, rather than as you think they should be. This does not mean accepting harmful behavior, but it does mean releasing unnecessary expectations that create tension. As attachment loosens, something remarkable begins to happen. The constant effort to control life diminishes. The need to hold on tightly begins to fade. In its place, a sense of openness emerges, a willingness to experience life as it unfolds, rather than as it is imagined. This openness is not weakness. It is strength. It requires trust, not blind trust in outcomes, but a deeper trust in your ability to navigate whatever arises. When you are not bound by rigid expectations, you become more responsive to the present moment. You adapt more easily. You see opportunities where there was once resistance. This does not mean that you will never feel disappointment or frustration. These emotions are part of human experience. The difference is that they no longer dominate your internal state. They arise, are acknowledged, and pass without creating lasting disturbance. This is the beginning of emotional freedom. Freedom not from experience, but from unnecessary suffering created by attachment. Freedom to engage with life fully without being constrained by the need for it to conform to specific expectations. As you continue to observe attachment in your life, you may notice that it often operates at a very subtle level. It is not always obvious. Sometimes it appears as a slight preference that gradually becomes a rigid demand. Sometimes it hides behind logical reasoning, making it seem justified. This is why continuous awareness is essential. Each time you notice attachment, you create an opportunity to release it, even if only slightly. This process is gradual. It does not require drastic changes or forced detachment. It simply requires honesty and observation. Over time, these small shifts accumulate. The mind becomes less reactive. The emotional landscape becomes more stable. The need to control every detail of life begins to dissolve. And in that space, a deeper sense of peace begins to emerge, one that is not dependent on specific conditions. This peace is not dramatic or overwhelming. It is quiet, steady, and consistent. It does not draw attention to itself, but it is always present once recognized. It is the kind of peace that remains even when circumstances change. The kind that allows you to move through uncertainty without being consumed by it. The kind that does not need constant reassurance, because it is rooted in something deeper than external validation. This is the peace that becomes accessible when attachment loosens. And as you begin to experience it, even in small moments, you will realize that letting go is not a loss. It is a return to a state that is not defined by constant striving or fear, but by clarity, presence, and quiet strength. This is the path forward. And with each step, the grip of attachment weakens, making space for a deeper, more enduring form of inner peace to take its place. Chapter 4. There is a pattern that quietly shapes much of human suffering, yet it often remains hidden because it feels so justified, so reasonable, and so deeply aligned with how the mind believes life should unfold. This pattern is resistance, the inner opposition to what is already happening. Resistance is not always loud or dramatic. It does not always appear as anger or visible frustration. More often, it exists in subtle forms, a persistent thought that something should not be the way it is, a quiet dissatisfaction with the present moment, an internal argument with reality that runs continuously in the background of awareness. At its core, resistance is the refusal to fully accept the present moment. To understand this more clearly, consider how often your thoughts include phrases such as, "This should not be happening," "This is not how things were supposed to go," or "This needs to change immediately." These thoughts may feel natural, even justified, but they carry a hidden cost. They create a division between what is and what you believe should be. This division generates tension. The moment reality does not align with expectation, the mind reacts. It attempts to correct, to control, to reshape what has already occurred. But there is a fundamental limitation in this approach. The present moment, once it arrives, cannot be undone. It can be responded to, influenced moving forward, but it cannot be reversed in the instant it is experienced. Resistance, therefore, is a struggle against something that already exists. And in that struggle, energy is lost. This is why resistance often feels exhausting. It consumes mental and emotional resources without producing meaningful change. It keeps the mind locked in a loop of dissatisfaction, replaying scenarios, analyzing what went wrong, or imagining how things should have been different. Inner peace cannot coexist with this constant internal conflict. This does not mean that you should passively accept all circumstances without taking action. There is an important distinction between acceptance and resignation. Acceptance is the clear recognition of what is happening in the present moment without adding unnecessary mental opposition. Resignation, on the other hand, is the belief that nothing can be done, leading to inaction. Acceptance is active. Resistance is reactive. When you accept a situation, you are not agreeing with it or approving of it. You are simply acknowledging its presence. This acknowledgement creates clarity. It allows you to see the situation as it is, rather than through the distortion of frustration or denial. From that clarity, effective action becomes possible. Without acceptance, actions are often driven by emotion, anger, fear, impatience. These emotions can cloud judgment, leading to impulsive decisions that may not address the situation effectively. With acceptance, the emotional charge is reduced. The mind becomes calmer, more focused, and better equipped to respond thoughtfully. Consider a simple example. You are faced with an unexpected delay. Perhaps a plan changes, a process takes longer than expected, or something you were relying on does not occur as anticipated. The immediate reaction may be irritation. The mind may begin to generate thoughts such as, "This is wasting my time," or "This should not be happening." This reaction is resistance. Now observe what happens if, instead of engaging with these thoughts, you acknowledge the situation directly. This is what is happening right now. There is no argument, no additional commentary, just a simple recognition of reality. In that moment, something shifts. The tension decreases. The urgency created by resistance begins to dissolve. You may still prefer a different outcome, but the internal conflict is reduced. From this state, you can decide how to use the time, whether to adjust your plan or simply remain present without unnecessary frustration. The external situation remains the same, but your experience of it changes completely. This illustrates a fundamental principle. Much of the discomfort you experience is not caused by the situation itself, but by your resistance to it. When resistance is removed, even challenging situations become more manageable. This does not mean they become easy or pleasant, but they lose the additional layer of suffering created by internal opposition. You are able to engage with them more directly without the burden of constant mental conflict. Resistance also operates strongly in relation to emotions. When uncomfortable emotions arise, such as sadness, anxiety, or frustration, the mind often attempts to avoid or suppress them. It may distract itself, deny their presence, or judge them as undesirable. This creates a secondary layer of resistance on top of the original emotion. For example, you may feel anxious about a situation. In addition to the anxiety, there may be thoughts such as, "I should not feel this way," or "This needs to go away." These thoughts create resistance to the emotion, which often intensifies it. The emotion is no longer just anxiety. It becomes anxiety combined with frustration and self-judgment. This amplifies the experience. Inner peace develops when you learn to allow emotions without resistance. Allowing does not mean indulging or becoming overwhelmed. It means acknowledging the emotion as it is without immediately trying to change it. You observe the sensation, notice its presence in the body, and allow it to exist without adding additional layers of thought. This approach may seem counterintuitive. The instinct is often to eliminate discomfort as quickly as possible. But paradoxically, resistance tends to prolong and intensify emotions, while acceptance allows them to move naturally. Emotions, like thoughts, are temporary. When they are not resisted, they follow a natural cycle. They arise, reach a peak, and gradually subside. When they are resisted, this cycle is disrupted, and they may persist longer than necessary. By allowing emotions to be experienced fully, without resistance, you create space for them to pass. This process requires trust. It requires the understanding that emotions, no matter how intense, are not permanent. They are part of the human experience, not a threat to your identity. When you stop fighting them, you begin to see their transient nature more clearly. Another important aspect of resistance is its connection to control. The mind seeks control because it associates control with safety. It believes that if everything can be predicted and managed, discomfort can be avoided. But life does not function in a fully predictable way. Uncertainty is inherent in existence. When the need for control becomes excessive, resistance increases. Any deviation from expectation is perceived as a problem. The mind reacts, attempting to restore control, often without success. This creates a continuous cycle of tension, as reality rarely conforms perfectly to expectations. Letting go of excessive control is essential for inner peace. This does not mean abandoning responsibility or planning. It means recognizing the limits of control and accepting that not everything can be managed. You do what you can with the information and resources available, and you allow the rest to unfold. This shift reduces resistance. It creates a more flexible approach to life, one that adapts to change rather than fighting it. You become more responsive, less rigid, and more open to unexpected outcomes. Over time, as resistance decreases, you may begin to notice a profound change in your internal state. Situations that once triggered strong reactions may feel less intense. Delays, disruptions, and uncertainties may no longer create the same level of frustration. There is a growing sense of ease, not because life has become perfect, but because your relationship with it has changed. This ease is not passive. It is a form of strength. It reflects an ability to remain steady in the face of change, to engage with challenges without being overwhelmed by them. It allows you to navigate life with clarity rather than being driven by constant internal conflict. As you continue to observe resistance in your daily life, you will begin to see how often it appears. It may arise in small, almost insignificant moments, minor inconveniences, brief interactions, simple expectations. These moments provide valuable opportunities for practice. Each time you notice resistance, you can choose to release it, even slightly. You do this not by force, but by awareness. You recognize the pattern, acknowledge the present moment, and allow it to be as it is. This does not eliminate all discomfort, but it reduces unnecessary suffering. With consistent practice, this approach becomes more natural. The mind gradually learns that resistance is not necessary for functioning. It begins to relax its constant need to oppose reality. And as it does, a deeper sense of calm begins to emerge. This calm is not dependent on external conditions. It exists even when situations are imperfect, even when challenges arise. It is a steady presence that remains beneath the fluctuations of experience. It does not require effort to maintain, because it is not created. It is revealed when resistance subsides. This is the essence of inner peace in action, not as an abstract idea, but as a lived experience, one that becomes more accessible with each moment of awareness, each act of acceptance, and each release of resistance. And as this becomes more integrated into your life, you begin to notice something remarkable. The world around you may remain unpredictable, but your inner world becomes stable. And in that stability, you find a peace that is not easily shaken, a peace that does not depend on everything going right, but on your ability to remain present, aware, and open to whatever unfolds. This is the quiet power of acceptance. And it is one of the most direct paths to lasting inner peace. It does not require effort to access, nor does it depend on achieving a particular state or condition. It is not hidden, yet it is often overlooked. This dimension is the present moment. The present moment is where life actually happens. Not in the past, which exists only as memory. Not in the future, which exists only as projection. Everything you experience, every sensation, every thought, every interaction occurs now. And yet, despite this obvious truth, the mind spends a remarkable amount of time elsewhere. It replays past events, analyzing what could have been done differently. It anticipates future scenarios, imagining outcomes that may never occur. It constructs narratives, creates expectations, and constantly moves between what has been and what might be. In doing so, it often misses what is. This habitual movement away from the present moment is one of the primary reasons inner peace feels distant. When attention is scattered between past and future, the mind becomes restless. It carries unresolved emotions from previous experiences and combines them with uncertainty about what lies ahead. This creates a continuous undercurrent of tension, even in moments where there is no immediate problem. To understand the importance of the present moment, it is necessary to observe how the mind interacts with time. The past is a record. It contains valuable information, lessons, and experiences that shape understanding, but it is no longer happening. When the mind revisits the past excessively, it often does so not to learn, but to relive, replaying mistakes, regrets, or missed opportunities. This creates emotional responses in the present based on events that no longer exist. Similarly, the future is a possibility. It is useful for planning and preparation, but it is inherently uncertain. When the mind projects into the future, it often creates scenarios that generate anxiety, imagining outcomes that may never occur, yet producing real emotional responses in the present. In both cases, attention is removed from the only moment that is real. Inner peace is found when attention returns to the present. This does not mean ignoring the past or neglecting the future. It means using them when necessary, but not living in them. It means recognizing that while reflection and planning have their place, they do not need to dominate your awareness. The challenge lies in the mind's tendency to drift. Even when you intend to remain present, attention often moves unconsciously. You may begin a simple activity, walking, eating, listening, and within moments, the mind is engaged in unrelated thoughts. This is not a failure. It is a reflection of conditioning. The key is not to prevent the mind from wandering, but to notice when it does. This noticing is awareness. Each time you become aware that your attention has drifted, you have an opportunity to return. This return is not forced. It is gentle. You simply bring your focus back to what is happening now. This practice may seem repetitive, but it is transformative. With consistency, the mind becomes more accustomed to staying present. The gaps between moments of awareness begin to shorten. The intensity of mental distraction begins to decrease. Gradually, a sense of stability emerges. To deepen this experience, it is helpful to engage fully with ordinary activities. Consider something as simple as breathing. Breathing is constant, yet it often goes unnoticed. By bringing attention to the breath, you connect directly with the present moment. You can observe the sensation of air entering and leaving the body, the rise and fall of the chest, the subtle rhythm that continues without effort. In doing so, you anchor your awareness. The breath becomes a point of reference, a stable element that exists only in the present. Whenever the mind drifts, you can return to it. This return is not about control, but about reconnection. Similarly, you can bring awareness to other aspects of experience. When you are walking, feel the contact between your feet and the ground. Notice the movement of your body, the rhythm of your steps. When you are eating, pay attention to taste, texture, and the act of chewing. When you are listening to someone, focus fully on their words, their tone, their presence. These practices transform ordinary moments into opportunities for presence. They shift attention from automatic thinking to direct experience. And in that shift, the mind naturally becomes quieter. This quietness is not forced. It arises because attention is no longer feeding unnecessary thought, The mind does not need to create constant commentary when it is fully engaged with what is happening. It begins to settle, much like water that becomes still when it is no longer disturbed. In this stillness, a different quality of experience emerges. You may begin to notice details that were previously overlooked. Sounds become clearer. Sensations become more vivid. Interactions feel more genuine. There is a sense of being fully involved in life rather than observing it from a distance through constant thought. This is presence. Presence is not a technique. It is a state of awareness in which you are fully engaged with the current moment without being lost in mental distractions. It does not require effort once it is established, but it does require practice to develop. One of the most significant benefits of presence is its effect on emotional experience. When you are fully present, emotions are experienced more directly, without the added layer of mental interpretation. For example, if you feel sadness, presence allows you to feel it as a sensation, without immediately creating a story around it. This reduces its intensity and duration. Similarly, when you experience joy, presence allows you to fully appreciate it, rather than diminishing it through distraction or comparison. Presence enhances both clarity and depth. It allows you to see situations more accurately without the distortion of excessive thinking. It enables you to respond more effectively because your attention is not divided. It also enriches experience, making even simple moments feel meaningful. Another important aspect of the present moment is its relationship with time perception. When the mind is constantly engaged in thought, time often feels either rushed or prolonged. Moments pass without being fully experienced, leading to a sense that time is slipping away. Alternatively, certain situations may feel drawn out, especially when accompanied by discomfort. In presence, the perception of time changes. Moments feel complete. There is less urgency, less sense of being pulled forward or backward. Time is experienced as it unfolds, rather than as something to be managed or controlled. This shift reduces stress. Much of stress is related to time deadlines, expectations, anticipation. When attention is anchored in the present, these pressures lose some of their intensity. You still act, plan, and respond, but you do so from a place of stability rather than urgency. As presence deepens, you may begin to notice a subtle but profound realization. The present moment is not lacking. The mind often creates the impression that something is missing, that fulfillment lies elsewhere, in a different time, a different situation, a different outcome. But when you are fully present, this sense of lack begins to dissolve. There is a completeness in the moment as it is. This does not mean that everything is perfect or that improvement is unnecessary. It means that the moment itself is sufficient as a place of experience. It does not need to be resisted or escaped. This realization is central to inner peace. When you no longer feel the need to escape the present moment, the constant search for something else diminishes. The mind relaxes. The sense of urgency decreases. You become more comfortable with simply being. This comfort is not passive. It is a form of stability that allows you to engage with life more effectively. When you are not constantly seeking escape, your actions become more focused. Your decisions become clearer. Your interactions become more authentic. Presence also strengthens your ability to observe the mind. When you are anchored in the present, thoughts are easier to notice. They appear as movements within awareness, rather than as the center of experience. This makes it easier to maintain the separation discussed in earlier chapters, the recognition that you are not your thoughts. This reinforces inner peace. You are less affected by mental fluctuations because you are not fully identified with them. You can observe them, understand them, and allow them to pass without being carried away. As you continue to practice presence, it is important to approach it with patience. The mind will wander. Distractions will arise. There will be moments when you feel fully present, followed by moments when you are completely absorbed in thought. This is natural. The goal is not to maintain constant presence immediately. The goal is to return again and again. Each return strengthens the habit of awareness. Each moment of presence contributes to a gradual shift in how you experience life. Over time, this shift becomes more stable. You begin to spend less time lost in thought and more time engaged with reality. The mind becomes a tool rather than a constant source of distraction, and in that transformation, inner peace becomes more accessible. It is no longer something you experience, only occasionally. It becomes a background presence, a quiet, steady sense of ease that remains even as life continues to unfold with its usual complexities. This is the power of the present moment. It does not remove challenges, but it changes how they are experienced. It does not eliminate thought, but it reduces its dominance. It does not require perfection, but it invites awareness. And as you continue to return to it, moment by moment, you begin to realize that inner peace has never been separate from the present. It has always been here, waiting for your attention. And now, with awareness, you are beginning to notice it.